I, like probably a significant majority of Kansas football fans, absolutely gobbled up all of the hype. I mean, just absolutely ate it up, drank the Kool-Aid. You know, I sat here in the preseason and picked KU to go 11-1. I just absolutely was inhaling all of it. Like, yes, KU, yes, right? And over the last really 2.5 years, ever since kind of the Liberty Bowl season for Kansas, and as you know, there's a famous clip of Lance Leipold saying, hey, they were clapping for us when we lost to Oklahoma because we kept it close, right? To where now KU is now. A lot of that is over the past couple of years has been Kansas and Lance Leipold emphatically delivering this message of, hey, we are impervious to the hype. We're not paying attention to the outside noise. We're just continuing to get 1% better every day. We're building that. And it seems like that message maybe rang hollow early in the season is my takeaway, is that maybe some of the guys on this team and in that locker room sort of did buy into their own hype a little bit too much. Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible. Heed all who enter, and beware of this podcast. That's right, this is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm with my guy, Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And we are here to try to salvage after a tough loss for Kansas earlier on Saturday night in Champaign. But it's a quick turnaround for KU as they're going to be taking on a tough UNLV opponent coming up on Friday night at Children's Mercy Park. It'll be the final game at Children's Mercy Park this season for KU before they start playing at Arrowhead Stadium. And boy, there is a lot to get through with kind of looking back and wrapping up in Illinois. And then the quick turnaround with UNLV coming in to Children's Mercy Park up here soon. As always, if you like what you're hearing or watching, if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to leave a like, subscribe. If you were joined us for our live postgame show on Saturday night after the Illinois loss, thank you so much once again for joining and sharing your thoughts. You can also share your thoughts with us anytime on the KCSN hotline powered by mobile at 913-407-6524. That's 913-407-6524 if you want to join in on the conversation. And Kevin, let's start here. You know, we did our live post-game show on Saturday, and now that you've had a little bit more time to absorb Kansas's 23-17 loss to Illinois, where are you sitting now? Where are you sitting now after that? Kansas is 1-1. You've had a couple days now trying to turn the page into UNLV. Where are you sitting now as it pertains to KU at the moment?
Yeah, in kind of a weird spot, Nick. And what I mean by that is, you know, rewatching the tape, it was both more frustrating and less frustrating in a lot of ways. In one way, you know, I think a lot of us, and I was certainly no stranger to this, you know, on the live show, if you guys watched that, had a lot of criticism for Jeff Grimes and calling the game. And he wasn't perfect. You know, he even said when we talked to him, hey, I got to give the ball to Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw, you know, in the crunch time. And when Lance Leipold talked to us, he said, hey, we should have just run the ball a little bit more because one of the things that they kind of talked about was they call a lot of RPO stuff, you know, where you have the option to throw the ball depending on sort of the numbers and where the defenders are at it and all of those things. And so that wound up taking the ball out of Devin Neal's hands maybe a little bit more than they would have liked. But the other thing that going back and rewatching, and I thought this was maybe one of the more fascinating comments from Grimes, was going back and rewatching, Kansas really wasn't far off. And that's again, more frustrating in some ways and less frustrating in others. There were several plays that were set up to be really big plays. A guy misses a block. Jalen's third interception, it looked like a bad ball when he threw it, right? That, you know, hey, you threw that thing into the safety. In reality, he was just late with the decision. If he got that ball out of his hands and sort of threw the receiver open, you know, he might have had a touchdown. He might have walked in, you know, depending on how that went. The screen pass, another interception. That one, I think a lot of people had blame for both Grimes and Jalen Daniels on that. And Jalen had to float it to get it over the defensive end, added a little more time. And yes, it was a somewhat predictable play call. And yes, a lot of people are not going to like that play call in 3rd and long. But at the same time, it was something that Nick was pretty well set up. They had the blockers there for the players. They just missed a block. You look at the Quentin Skinner reverse was a play that was set up, but the ball hit the turf. It wound up not being a run. You have a touchdown called back because of, offensive pass interference. And so that's what I mean by that is it wasn't even one guy where you can necessarily circle it and say, well, gosh, like Bobby shouldn't even be on the field. And it wasn't like a comedy of errors by, a specific player or players. And that includes Jalen Daniels, to be totally frank with you. There were some things that Jalen didn't do as well as he would have liked, I'm sure. And the coaches talked about it. But the Grimes part that I said was really interesting was I asked him basically how you deal with what was the message to the team kind of when you are close like that. When, are you hard on them because you say, hey, you needed to execute this play. It was there and you didn't execute it. Do you look at it from a positive standpoint and say, hey, we weren't that far off, guys. You take care of these one or two things and we'll be coasting. And his answer kind of didn't have to do with either of those. He said, well, it depends on the team. But he said, my message to the team was that you have to prepare to win. And he said that he didn't show the team clips from the game. He showed them clips from how they were bad at practice leading into the game, basically implying that they didn't practice well heading into the game, and that wound up hurting them during the game. And so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it after watching the game. Like I said, a little more frustrating, a little less frustrating based on that, where you say, gosh, the win really was there, and it was, this or that or this or that kind of kept them from getting there. But I also think that Grimes' point about that, and he did say they're practicing better now, that, he made it seem like things were maybe ticking up a little bit in that department going into UNLV. But what are your thoughts now that the heat of the moment has had a little bit of a chance to die down?
Yeah, my big thoughts kind of early in the week was I, like probably a significant majority of Kansas football fans, absolutely gobbled up all of the hype. I mean, just absolutely ate it up, drank the Kool-Aid. I sat here in the preseason and picked KU to go 11-1. I just absolutely was inhaling all of it. Like, yes, KU, yes, right? And over the last really 2.5 years, ever since kind of the Liberty Bowl season for Kansas, and as there's a famous clip of Lance Leipold saying, hey, they were clapping for us when we lost to Oklahoma because we kept it close, right? To where now KU is now. A lot of that is over the past couple of years has been Kansas and Lance Leipold emphatically delivering this message of, hey, we are impervious to the hype. We're not paying attention to the outside noise. We're just continuing to get 1% better every day. We're building that. And it seems like that message maybe rang hollow early in the season is my takeaway, is that maybe some of the guys on this team and in that locker room sort of did buy into their own hype a little bit too much. And that was kind of, the more I looked back on the game against Illinois, was kind of my takeaway is, especially there were times where it would cut to the KU sideline and you could see guys trying to get fired up, basically trying to say like, hey, we're better, right? Like this is who we are. We're the better team. And it just, that was my takeaway is I think maybe some of that outside noise maybe seeped into the locker room. And as hard as Lance Leipold has worked, I mean, I think he's worked pretty much tirelessly on this subject for the past couple of years to sort of prevent that from happening. I think the more I think about it over the past couple of days and after the Illinois game, I think some of that got into the locker room for Kansas. And they've got to find a way to hit the reset button and get that and get away from that and get back to doing what they've been doing for the past couple of seasons, which is that 1% better, which is continuing to fight and get better every single game. And really that I kind of felt vindicated in having that thought early in the week by listening to what Jeff Grimes said early in the press conference on Tuesday, talking about how he didn't think that Kansas practiced well enough. Like you said, how he showed them practice clips instead of game clips. That to me all sort of really, I think, drives even further home that point of, yeah, I think maybe these guys thought they were hot stuff. They thought they were hot shit, right? And they got knocked down by Illinois. Now the question becomes, how does KU respond to that, right? And I have high hopes that they will respond in the correct way because of a couple of reasons. One, I know Lance Leipold is going to be certainly the driving force behind that. But two, we talked about it. This is a roster that has 30 seniors on it, right?
Yeah.
So you would expect these guys to be able to respond in the correct way, and this is not a team that doesn't know how to win anymore, right? I think when you look at some of the previous iterations of Kansas football, back when KU really struggled, games like this could destroy a season because you had players that didn't really know how to win because, quite frankly, Kansas hadn't won. Okay, it's hard to know how to win if you don't win. But that's not true of this team. This team has leadership on it that has won football games, and has won a lot of football games, actually, comparatively speaking, to previous Kansas teams. So you would think that should benefit them and allow them to hit the reset button after this loss to Illinois, because we kind of talked about it on the post-game show a little bit, and people probably didn't want to hear it at the time, but listen, it's a non-conference game against Illinois. It's a game that, in the grand scheme of things, really potentially could not matter at all, right? Like, you still have a chance to make a run of the Big 12. You still have a chance to have a successful season, and so on and so forth. So it's just a matter of how Kansas responds and whether or not they can sort of eliminate that hype that maybe they bought too much into themselves. Listen, it's one thing for me to buy in. It's one thing for Kansas fans to buy into the hype, but it seems like maybe the players bought in a little bit too much to themselves potentially. That was kind of my thought after the Illinois game and really early this week. And again, I felt sort of vindicated in that based off some of the comments we heard from the coaching staff earlier in the week as well. My other thought is this. I want to talk a little bit deeper about Jeff Grimes for a moment. I understand that KU fans are frustrated. I understand that, you have a guy like Devin Neal, who is a hometown legend at this point, right? Who is going to go down as one of the best running backs in Kansas history ever. And so it can be very frustrating when you have a player like that, especially being the fact that he's from Lawrence and he really truly embodies everything about being a Jayhawk. And you have a game where you feel like if you just give him the ball more, you win the game, right? That's going to really, really rile some people up. But I just really want to pump the brakes here on this idea that Jeff Grimes is seemingly not fit, and not fit to be offensive coordinator. And I'm not saying that a large segment of people are saying that but listen, you go on social media and KU fans are not happy with Jeff Grimes right now, and some of it is valid, but I am of the opinion right now that it's going too far. This guy's has called two games for KU. And I'm really, really kind of surprised by the extreme intense reaction. Again, I'm assuming a lot of that comes from the fact that, like I mentioned, KU fans fully bought into the hype. I know I did, right? And so I think because of that, and then you have this immediate disappointing start. Obviously, I think KU fans, they don't want to blame Jalen Daniels. Devin Neal's infallible. The rest of the offense is, whatever. So you don't want to blame any of those people. So who do you blame? You blame Jeff Grimes. But it's been two games. I mean, this is a guy that had a top 5 rushing offense at Baylor not so long ago. He was very successful at BYU. I have no doubt that Lance Leipold wouldn't have brought him in if he didn't trust that he could, lead this offense for Kansas. So I'm just going to really kind of hit the brake, or honestly, I'm just going to slam the brakes, to be quite frankly with you, about all this Jeff Grimes talk about, whatever. I think you just got to trust in the process at this point with Lance Leipold. Lance Leipold is process-driven to a T, okay? So I think this offense for KU is going to be fine. I would assume that Jalen Daniels is not going to play another game like he did against Illinois going forward. I mean, that was by far the worst game of his college career, even going back to his freshman year when he was a 17-year-old kid. I have to take a glass half full approach to that and say, okay, Jalen Daniels is probably not going to play that bad ever again the rest of the season, barring an injury or something like that. So if you take that attitude, I think this offense for KU will be fine. Now, that all being said, it has to be fine, and it has to be fine right now because you've got a pretty red-hot UNLV team that is going to be rolling into Children's Mercy Park that I'm sure maybe smells a little bit of blood in the water based off of the performance KU had against Illinois. So this is going to be a very challenging game for Kansas at home, quote-unquote, at Children's Mercy Park, because I think UNLV is going to come in and say, hey, we've had a couple good games. We beat the snot out of Houston. Houston then went and almost beat Oklahoma on the road. We're feeling pretty good. Kansas is maybe limping in a little bit. It's a short week. Let's put it on them. So KU's going to have to quickly respond, right? This is not a situation where you lose this game and you maybe have a little bit of extra time to sort of get back on your feet. No, KU is going to get a real fight from UNLV. I firmly believe that coming up on Friday night, and they absolutely must be ready.
Yeah, the offense must be ready. I mean, the whole team needs to be ready, but the offense needs to be ready for a couple of reasons, Nick. One, UNLV's offense is really good. We saw that in the bowl game, and there are some new elements to that, and I'm sure that we'll get into that here in a little bit. But the other part is I think the defense is better too, and so it's not going to be as easy to score, and UNLV has a chance to score some points in this one. So you got to be able to keep pace and do it against a defense that's probably better than it was a year ago. To your point about Jalen too, one of the things that people really had issues with the Illinois game was, taking the ball kind of out of Devin Neal's hands and giving it to Jalen. But let's look at the flip side of that too. We've said this whole offseason, Kansas doesn't get to where it wants to be this season without Jalen Daniels being Jalen Daniels, right? And I think that's a pretty accurate statement. Kansas can probably have a pretty solid offense by lining up and running Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw. But Kansas doesn't win the Big 12, which is one of their stated goals, without Jalen Daniels, kind of being that spark and that extra guy. I'm right there with you in that I expect him to bounce back pretty quickly. I think he's built for that. I think that the leadership and the guys that they have around him, help with a lot of that stuff. And I thought Lance Leipold's comments about guys pressing was kind of interesting. And then he was asked specifically, is Jalen in that group? And he's like, well, I don't want to talk about that. But, and then he basically said, the guys who were pressing we talked to, and he also said that Jalen had bounced back. Grimes had said the same thing, that he liked kind of where Jalen was at in his headspace and all of those things. But you're absolutely right. This isn't a, get right by mid-season type of thing, especially with the goals that Kansas has, especially with the Big 12 schedule starting off the way that it does, where you're going to West Virginia, which is a very tough environment. West Virginia is a capable team. I know they didn't play well against Penn State, but you look at that, the guys that they have, you can't, that's not a game that you can come in and play like you did against Illinois. You do that, you're going to lose again. And so I think that whole, get right switch, you kind of need to flip that right away this week.
Yeah, look, if you play like you did against Illinois in any game in the Big 12 Conference, you're probably going to lose. Like, it's not just going to be West Virginia. You're going to lose some more games. So, but again, like I said, I think you have to take the glass half full approach to that and say, look, Jalen Daniels is not going to play that bad again. I think, whatever the message was from Jeff Grimes rewatching the game, whatever, I hope he received it, which is, hey, listen, with this offense, you have so many different weapons. You don't need guys to play hero ball, right? You don't need Jalen Daniels to go be a hero every single play. It's okay to run HB dive. Like, I run HB dive all the time at Coach 125. It's a great play. It's a fantastic play. 2nd and 6 is better than 2nd and 10, and it's certainly better than a pick 6 like you had at the end of the half against Illinois. So I understand the criticism of Jeff Grimes. I just want to fully kind of really slam the brakes on that, because I think it's been 2 games. He's a very experienced play caller as a coach, and I think you have to have confidence in Lance Leipold, who made the hire of Jeff Grimes, obviously, Jeff Grimes himself, to get things ironed out pretty quickly. So, okay, we kind of touched on the UNLV there. Let's dive a lot more into them coming up on the other side. First, let's tell you, as always, about Home Field Apparel. Check out homefieldapparel.com to get over 50-plus Kansas items, including some new bomber jackets, by the way, some coaches' jackets that were released by Home Field Apparel as well recently. You can use promo code PAYHEAT24 for 15% off your first order over at homefieldapparel.com. So you still got time. Home Field Apparel's got you covered with all types of gear throughout the season. So if you're thinking, oh man, is it too late for me to get a t-shirt? Hey, it's not too late for you to get a sweatshirt. Not too late for you to get a pair of sweatpants. My KU joggers that I got from Home Field Apparel, I'm pretty close to busting them out. They are the most comfortable, warmest joggers I've ever owned. And you can get those too over at homefieldapparel.com. We're back to talk UNLV coming up next.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest-ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
When you discover a new binge-worthy show or a song that you bump on repeat and you have to share it with your friends so they can experience just how awesome it is, that's kind of what it feels like when you discover Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. That's such an awesome deal. There's no way you can keep it to yourself. Friends don't let friends overpay for wireless. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plan and switch to Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you and your squad with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/payheed. That's mintmobile.com/payheed. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/payheed. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. Look, we got you a paid 24 code, 50% off your first order home field apparel. We're also going to try to give you $500. If you want an extra $500, go to bluewirepods.com/survey and complete the Blue Wire audience survey about you and your podcast listening habits for a chance to win a $500 gift card. This survey will help create a better advertising experience for you and in turn help our show here and also help the Kansas City Sports Network. That's bluewirepods.com/survey where all you have to do is answer some simple questions for a chance to win $500. Make sure to read the full terms and disclaimer and complete the survey for a chance to win at bluewirepods.com/survey. The link is also in the show notes of this episode. If you like what you're hearing or if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating and review, leave us a comment. You can also share a comment on the KCSN and Mint Mobile hotline at 913-407-6524. Also, to join in on the conversation. Okay, like we kind of talked about in the open there, a quick turnaround for Kansas for a Friday night game against UNLV at Children's Mercy Park. This has been the opponent that we have probably talked about the most heading into this season. I think because of the fact that obviously you just played them, right? So this is going to be your second time playing them in 4 games with them coming to Children's Mercy Park. But this is a very different UNLV team and quite frankly, a pretty different Kansas team coming into this game compared to what we saw in the bowl game. Obviously, most notably, Jason Bean gone, Jalen Daniels now the quarterback for Kansas. But let's start with UNLV. Defensively, especially, this is an area you've highlighted, Kevin. They've added a number of transfers, and they have looked very, very strong to start the year with their win against Houston and then beating an FCS school as well. And in a game in which they were up, I think, 44-0, and it was pretty much over, and then they just kept piling on. They ended up scoring 72. But tell me a little bit more about what you think about this UNLV defense so far this season.
Yeah, the funny thing is Utah Tech actually scored pretty quickly last week. I think UNLV was up 14-7, like 4 minutes into the game. You had already seen 3 touchdowns between the two teams, and then UNLV just ran away and hit. And like you said, with the Houston game, Houston not scoring at all until a touchdown kind of in the dying embers of that game. The defense has gotten a lot better, and I know people are going to say, well, who have they played? And yes, Houston's offense, including against Oklahoma, I think they scored 1 offensive touchdown against Oklahoma. It was on a bust, maybe that Brent Venables was none too happy about. For Houston's offense does struggle, but at the same time, I do think that they've done a much better job of upgrading their personnel across the board. You talked about the transfers. Especially on the back end, it felt like they brought in half the SEC to basically say, hey, between all these guys, somebody's got to be able to go cover somebody. And Nick, I think the interesting thing about that is if you look at where UNLV had the biggest issues with Kansas, it was in that secondary against the Kansas wide receivers. UNLV actually did a pretty solid job of slowing down Kansas's run game, but Kansas really savaged that back end of the UNLV defense.
Yeah, that was the difference maker when they played in the bowl game, like you mentioned, with Jason Bean kind of slinging it all over the place. In the bowl game, Devin Neal really kind of struggled, and it wasn't because they weren't giving him the ball. Okay, I know everyone's all uptight about how many carries Devin Neal is getting after the Illinois game. Against UNLV, he was getting the ball, and UNLV was just simply stopping him. And I think that's even more interesting because of the fact that Jeff Grimes was asked about, the UNLV defense and where he saw, some of the biggest challenges. And he immediately jumped to their front seven, to their defensive line and their linebacking core. So this could be another game where people are going to hate this, but I think Kansas is probably going to try to pass the ball a little bit more in this game too, right? We'll see what they do early if they try to run the ball against UNLV, but I think this could be another game where Kansas maybe have to look to the air a little bit more because UNLV may be trying to sell out to stop the run. That's basically what they did last year against Kansas in the bowl game, and I would guess that UNLV is going to say, hey, you know what? In the bowl game last year, we sold out to stop the run, and we did stop the run. Now we've upgraded our secondary with some transfers. Let's try it again. Let's run it back. Let's try to just sell out for the run again, and let's hopefully rely on some of the more talented players we've acquired through the transfer portal that can maybe shore up our secondary a little bit against Kansas. I would not be surprised one bit if that's UNLV's defensive strategy coming into this game.
Yeah, UNLV's there are 10 defensive backs that are listed on the 2D. They go out there with 5 guys, and then they've got 5 guys behind them. 7 are new transfers. So they really saw a need and went out and addressed it. And obviously you think, hey, it's going to take a little while for all the pieces to fully mesh or whatever. But I also think that coaches like to say the further away you are from the ball, the easier it is to acclimate really quickly. You know, if you're a defensive tackle moving into a new system, the game moves so quickly that you take one bad step and you're done for the play, right? The ball's already gone. And so I think it's a little bit easier to integrate those guys into the back end of your defense. And obviously, so far, it's worked for UNLV. I'm right there with you in that if I'm UNLV's coaching staff and head coach, Barry Odom is a defensive guy. Like that's his strength. I realize UNLV has been an offensive program and they've done a great job with that, but Odom is a defensive guy. You expect them to take a step forward as he's the coach there. And it'll be interesting to see if they do decide, hey, we're not going to let you run over us again. If you're going to beat us, we're going to bet that Jalen's not going to throw for 350 or 400 yards like he did last year.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's Jalen instead of Jason Bean this time, right? Yeah. So before it was Jason Bean, now you do have Jalen Daniels, and yeah, I kind of have to agree with you. I think on UNLV's strategy. Old friend alert, Jalen Catalon. We talked about him in the past from Texas, now at UNLV. So he's going to be playing Kansas again in a different uniform this time for UNLV. He'll be a guy to keep an eye on. He had 2 interceptions in the game against Houston, actually, in open season for UNLV. So he'll be a playmaker to keep an eye on, certainly in the secondary. And then, yeah, I think for this Kansas offense, like I said, I would not be surprised if they end up having to lean to the pass game a little bit more, if nothing else, really for 2 reasons. One, like we just outlined, I think UNLV, if they're smart, probably will just try to sell out to stop the run again, especially after watching what KU did offensively passing the ball against Illinois. I'm sure they'll look at that film and say, okay, we definitely need to double down and stop the run and see if Jalen Daniels can bounce back from the game he had against Illinois. But 2, the game script of this game may be such that Kansas may need to pass the ball. And what I mean by that is UNLV's offense has looked pretty good with transfer quarterback Matthew Sluka in. They may be putting pressure on Kansas via their offense scoring as well in this game, because you look back to that bowl game, and if you remember, Kevin, Kansas jumped out to a pretty big lead, but they kind of took their foot off the gas pedal, and UNLV was right there. I mean, they came right back in that game. So for Kansas, you've got to play for all 4 quarters, certainly against this UNLV team. Let's flip over to the offense here for UNLV. I mentioned it with Matthew Sluka, the transfer quarterback. They beat Houston by 20 points. They put up 72 against Utah Tech last week. What are your expectations for this UNLV offense coming into this game against Kansas?
Sluka is such a fascinating guy, and I'm glad Brian Borland talked about it when we had a chance to talk to him. And that you look at UNLV, they call it the go-go offense or whatever, and they've got weapons kind of all over the place. They've got good running backs. I love the DeJesus kid, who had a big bowl game against Kansas, who gets sometime a running back, jet sweeps, catching pass. He kind of does it all. And they've got a great group of wide receivers, including Ricky White. When you look at that guy, we had a chance to talk to we had a chance to talk to Mello and asked him, kind of said, hey, not trying to get you in trouble with anybody else, but where would Ricky White, kind of stack up on the receivers that you face? He's like, oh, he's right up there, at the top. And he said the reason why was the way that he runs routes, makes him really difficult to defend. So the point is that you've got all those guys around Sluka, and then you bring in Sluka. Jade Mayava was more of kind of a pure passing guy. Sluka, Nick, set the Division I record for most rushing yards by a quarterback in a game when he ran for 330 against Lafayette. And I'm not saying UNLV wants him to put up 330 yards worth. Sluka's not Michael Vick. He's a very good runner, but I don't think that that's there. But it does add that extra element, right? You're not just playing them for, okay, they're a pocket passing team. We have to watch the speed that they have, but the quarterback's generally going to hang out in the pocket. Now it pulls guys out of coverage because you got to keep an eye on him. They can do some designed run stuff in terms of quarterback run game. He's incredibly comfortable with that. And so when you add all of that together, it's just another element to this offense. And he's not the passer that Mayava was. And so he's not necessarily going to sit back in a pocket and throw for 300 some yards. He can throw the ball a little bit, but that's not necessarily who he is. But now there's that added element where it's, hey, your pass rushers got to stay in their lanes, because if they don't, you can get hurt. Hey, you got to have a guy watching him and seeing what he's doing, because if not, he's going to take off. And so it in a lot of ways, it sounds weird to say because UNLV's offense was so good last year, but Nick, they may be even more dangerous because of having that extra element this year.
Yeah, and you touched on the two guys that should be familiar names for Kansas fans that I was going to bring up as well, which is Ricky White, who I mentioned in the preseason. I pretty firmly believe actually that Ricky White will maybe be the best receiver that Kansas will face all season. I really believe that. I think he's a legit top 10 level receiver in the entire country for UNLV. So he may be the best receiver KU faces all season. Obviously, that's going to be a real challenge for the KU corners with Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson. And then Jacob DeJesus is the other guy who had a fantastic game, like you said, in the bowl game for UNLV against Kansas last year. And the one thing that I would keep an eye on in this game, and that I would maybe expect UNLV to do a lot of, is motioning with DeJesus and trying to get him into situations where they can use him with an option with Sluka and run the ball that way as well. That's something that I would keep an eye on this one, is if there's motion with DeJesus into situations where Sluka can, option it or whatever, to sort of really stress the Kansas defense in this game. And then obviously with Sluka, you kind of outlined it, much more of a dual threat. Again, they probably lose some like real passing threat with Sluka compared to Mayava. But I think it definitely still adds some extra levels to this offense with him at quarterback. And again, I think the biggest thing for me coming into this game is the fact that UNLV has looked so good to start the season. They are going to be very confident. And I think it was Brian Borland on Tuesday was kind of asked about the what it means to play against a team that's confident. And in some ways it doesn't change, but in other ways, I think at the college level especially, it certainly does change, right? Like week to week, that positive or negative momentum of your team can certainly have an impact on the following week's game. That's where Kansas has to hit the reset button after Illinois, and that's where UNLV is going to just look to continue to keep all of that rolling coming into this game against Kansas. So there's going to be a lot of stress on this KU defense. There's no doubt about it. I think over the past, let's say 5-6 days since the Illinois game, and now leading into this leading to this UNLV game, all of the headlines have been on the offense, Jeff Grimes, Daniels, all that stuff. But I don't want to overlook the defense for Kansas. They had a great game against Illinois. They played really well against Illinois, but they are going to be tested in this game against UNLV. Marvin Grant, I think I already mentioned it after the UNLV game in our post-game show that he was phenomenal. Brian Borland didn't go at that far. He said, hey, he had made some great plays, but he was out of position a couple of times, but he plays so fast that sometimes it can make up for that, where schematically he's not in the right spot, but his speed kind of overcomes that. Marvin Grant will be the key player, I think, again, in this game for KU against UNLV, because I would almost expect, I don't know, I guess we'll see how KU plays it, but I would think you want to have somebody kind of shading and spying Sluka for most of this game. And I think Marvin Grant, or whoever the Hawk/Cinco player is, which I think is going to be Grant most of the time, is probably going to be that player. Like, I would probably shade him and really focus on Sluka there. Now, obviously, that's going to put more pressure on some of the other guys, like especially at the linebacker position, guys like Cornell Wheeler, who to focus and take care of the running game if it's not Sluka running the ball. So you don't want to just maybe take your best player and take him out of plays if you haven't focused on the quarterback. But that's one strategy I think you could use. And then the other thing you mentioned with discipline with KU, I think this is a big game for a guy like a Dean Miller, right?
Yeah.
He has got the speed and he's got the playmaking ability to possibly impact this game, but he's going to have to be very disciplined. And he's somebody that maybe you could see chasing down Sluka on a pass play, but he can't lose his rush lane in case Sluka does take off and use his legs. And listen, we've seen this Kansas defense get bitten pretty badly by mobile quarterbacks that like to run the ball in the past. Against Altmaier, they were pretty good, actually, and Altmaier does like to scramble a little bit, but that's another area where I'll be watching closely. So I know a lot of the focus is going to be on the offense for Kansas, and I think that's very fair. But I think the defense had a strong game against Illinois, but they are certainly going to be facing another really tough test against UNLV. And you kind of mentioned it kicking off this whole segment, Kevin, is that this KU offense may be required to score a lot of points if the KU defense isn't able to fully slow down UNLV based on what they've done so far this season.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I think, the running game on offense could be fairly important. I mean, even if UNLV is selling out to stop it, we've talked about how this KU offensive line has a chance to maybe be more physical than in the years past. And I thought that showed up against Illinois. They were more physical than Illinois on both sides of the ball. And if you do that, you're going to give yourself a lot of chances. But if UNLV is putting extra guys in the box and Kansas is moving guys around and they're still able to run the ball to some extent, that could help. That could be the defense's best friend. I will say this, Nick, though. I'm going to make a prediction. I think DJ Warner gets his first sack as a Kansas Jayhawk on Friday night. I think he was really close to getting Altmaier and just couldn't quite finish the play. I think he completes that thing. Borland talked about how he's showing some really nice things, but he's kind of a guy that they want to have out there for 15 to 20 plays right now versus somebody that you push out there for 50 plays a game. But he also said if he continues to play well, it's going to be hard to not put him out there more and more. I think he winds up getting a sack, potentially even in a key moment in this one. But you're absolutely right, and it's kind of funny. Back when I covered Texas, Manny Diaz was there, who's now the head coach at Duke, and one of the things that he was fond of is you can win a national title by holding people to field goals. And while everybody wants 3 and outs and everybody wants, stops and things like that, that could wind up being a major difference in this game, Nick, is how Kansas's offense performs in the red zone, but also is Kansas's defense, when UNLV gets into that red zone, are they able to make those guys go for 3 rather than 7? And if they're able to do that and slow them down just a little bit, we could be sitting here a week from now saying, hey, that was the difference. The fact that they went into the red zone 5 times and they got a touchdown on 2 of those drives. That could be the reason that Kansas comes out of this thing with a win. And so even if UNLV moves the ball between the 20s, Kansas really needs to lock down and make sure that they're forcing UNLV to really struggle in that red zone.
Okay, you've already made one bold prediction. DJ Moore getting his career sack. Tell me who you think a player of the game is going to be for Kansas in this one against UNLV.
Oh, gosh, it's nice getting it this time because I would have loved to have Devin Neal against Lindenwood, and you beat me to that one. I think that Jalen Daniels is going to bounce back in a major way, and I'm not saying that it's going to be Jalen. I think a guy like LJ Arnold is going to have a big game. He had a huge game against UNLV in the bowl game. I think that Jalen's going to spread the ball around, and I think that when you look at who Jalen sort of naturally gravitates toward, it's Luke Grimm. And so I think that when Kansas gets into passing situations, UNLV and Barry Odom, they're going to say, hey, that's Luke Grimm over there. Do not let that guy get open. And he may get open anyways. Luke Grimm's a heck of a player, but I think a guy like LJ Arnold, who's another top option if Jalen has a big game, I think LJ, it makes for an interesting player of the game pick. How about you?
Yeah, I think, again, a lot of people probably aren't going to love hearing this right now, but I do believe that Kansas is probably not going to run the ball as much as people want, right? I think,
Yeah.
and I think for good reason, right? Like, you don't want the pendulum of, and this is why fans are not coaches, Kevin, because if fans were coaches, I can guarantee you the game plan for KU coming out of this UNLV game would be HB power 55 times with Devin Neal and Daniel Hishaw, right? Well, there's a reason why that's not the case. You still have to be balanced, and you still have to do different things. So I do agree with your sentiment about Jalen Daniels. I mentioned it. You have to assume he's going to play better. I think Lawrence Arnold is a fine pick. But I'm going to go to the defense here because I almost have a sneaking suspicion that the defense could be the difference in this game. I think it's safe to assume that the offense is going to look a little bit better than it did against Illinois, and I'm expecting the offense to look better and score some points. And that's why I think the defense could actually be the difference maker in this game. Really, I mentioned how much I love Marvin Grant. I'm looking at Mello Dotson.
All right.
Mello Dotson had a pick six against Lindenwood. This would be another game where I would circle him and say he might try to jump around on Ricky White. He might try to jump around on somebody and take one the other way. I think Mello Dotson may have the possibility to make a big play in this game. I would circle him potentially as somebody to keep an eye on because look, in a game like this, a defensive touchdown could be the difference between winning and losing this game for sure.
So, yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Well,
I think, you look at the defensive guys who were maybe the best players against Illinois. Borland singled out Tommy Dunn, saying he was maybe their best defensive lineman in that game. He talked about Cornell Wheeler taking steps forward and kind of becoming the complete package that they want him to be on that defensive side of the ball. And all of us noticed Marvin Grant. Borland was a little less bullish there. But I think as we look at all of those guys, it's interesting you say that because I was thinking if I'm picking a defensive guy, I'm probably picking either Mello or O.J. Burroughs for the exact same reason that you just mentioned. Like, one of those guys, I feel like, is going to fade Sluka in this game and wind up generating a big turnover. I don't know if it'll be a pick six, but the sort of thing where they get him to throw something. Sluka, like we said earlier, not that he's a bad passer, but he's not as consistent a thrower. And so there are maybe going to be some chances there. And so I really like your pick of Mello Dotson.
Well, look, without knowing too much about Holy Cross and the FCS, I have to make the assumption that Mello Dotson and Kobe Bryant are going to be the two best corners that Matthew Sluka is going to have played against up to this point in his career, right? Listen, no shade to whoever Holy Cross has on their schedule in the FCS. I don't know. Maybe there is some elite corners at the FCS level that I'm not aware of. But I assume that Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson are the two best corners that Sluka is going to be facing up to this point in his career. So I think that's it's kind of one of those things where it's like Sluka is obviously an experienced quarterback, right? Starting at the SS level and coming to UNLV, but it's almost like that. At the same time, he has that inexperience against perhaps this level of cerebral defensive backs that Kansas may have to offer in this game. So that's where I think, okay, Mello Dotson or Kobe Bryant for that matter, but I think Mello Dotson, one of those guys, or O.J. Burroughs, right? One of those guys I think will make a play or two that could lead to either a defensive touchdown or, a play that flips the game possibly in KU's favor. And on the flip side, I think Jalen Daniels is going to take care of the ball much better than he did against Illinois, is what I expect. Yeah. So, I mean, speaking of game-changing defensive plays that win you the game, that's exactly what happened to Kansas against Illinois, except the wrong way, the other way, the way Kansas fans didn't want. So now you flip it back the other way, and I think there's a possibility that Kansas could get something like that from their secondary in a game like this. Okay. Let's make some game predictions. What do you say? Do you think Kansas can flush the Illinois game on a short week against the go-go offense, Barry Odom's defense for UNLV? Can Kansas flip the switch and get back in the win column?
Yeah, I think so. I do think it's going to be really interesting because I think we've talked about this before. A coaching friend of mine always says that there are 3 seasons in college football, right? There's the opener that you have like 8 months to prepare for, basically. then you have the entire season, and then you get the bowl game where you get all that added prep time as well. UNLV prepared for KU's run game for a really long time, heading into that bowl game. It's the second time they faced within 4 games. It's really tough, I think, to prepare for a team with a week like that. And even beyond that, UNLV may have prepared for Kansas some, but with the Houston game being the opener, I'm sure that they kind of felt like, hey, we've got to really prepare for Houston. KU's in the same boat, right? You think about, it's difficult to prepare for the go-go offense, and with Illinois being on the schedule where it was, it's not like Kansas could spend the whole offseason preparing for the go-go offense. And so I think there's familiarity here, but there may be less familiarity than people think. And so both teams may be able to maybe get some things off that they usually would be able to, but weren't in the bowl game because the teams had so much prep time. Having said all that, you just asked me for a prediction. You didn't ask me for, like the Magna Carta or whatever. so I'll go ahead and say I do think that Kansas is going to bounce back. I think that this was probably a tough game to prepare for on limited time, et cetera. I think it's going to be a close game. I think UNLV really tests Kansas once again. It was close in the fourth quarter in the bowl game as well. But I see Kansas bouncing back and winning this one probably by a single score.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you are. I think I'm expecting, like I mentioned kind of earlier in the show, Kansas has 30 seniors. They have Lance Leipold. I'm guessing that they are going to adequately sort of, remove the cancer of the Illinois game, for lack of a better term, of, setting that aside and moving forward. And honestly, this is a situation where having a short week may help with that, right? I mean, you don't have time. You don't even have time to dwell on the Illinois game because you got a short week against UNLV. So I do think Kansas will bounce back. I think the offense will play better, but this is going to be a very stressful game. I do think that as well for Kansas on the field and for the fans in the stands at Children's Mercy Park as well. I think it's going to be a one-score game also. I'm going to make a score prediction. Okay. I'm going to guess Kansas wins this one 30-24 is my score prediction for Kansas. I think they will find a way to get back on track and win this game. They need it badly, obviously, like we highlighted with the West Virginia game on the horizon for KU, and you do not want to be going into conference play with a 1-2 record because, again, I think on one hand you could say, okay, well, conference play, you still got everything in front of you. It's a 12-team playoff. Go make the Big 12 title game, yada, 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 whatever. But the negative momentum that you are going to have internally and both from the fan base is going to be very significant to overcome if you are 1-2 heading into conference play. Because, I've said this for the past 3 years that, this year is the most hyped year for Kansas football since 2009. This year, I said that in 2022. I said it in 2023. I've said it again this year. But this year, it reached a fever pitch. It reached a whole new level for a variety of reasons. You expect this is Jalen Daniels last year. This is Devin Neal's last year. This is the receivers last year for those guys. You've got some veterans in the secondary as well that are moving on. Like everything over the past really 2.5 years, 3 years is sort of all climaxed to this moment, this season for Kansas. And I think a lot of Kansas fans have certainly felt that. And I think that's why there's so much angst and so much anxiety about losing to Illinois, because it feels like this dream of a special season of KU, going 11-1 or, winning double-digit games feels almost wiped away. And I don't think that that's entirely the case, but I understand the sentiment, at least because of the loss to Illinois and because of the way of how it unfolded and how KU seemed to be, the more talented and better team, but still couldn't win. So I get all that. I understand all of that. But at this stage, I think Kansas still has a chance to right the ship. Obviously, it's only 2 games into the season. Lance Leipold, if he's on social media, he's probably laughing at what KU fans are saying about the season being over, because like, how many games do we play? We played 12 games. We've only played 2. You got to relax. So again, I think there's both sides to it, and I understand both sides. I find myself on the more positive end of, okay, hey, it's one game against Illinois. Still, Kansas can bounce back. If KU drops this game against UNLV at home, Children's Mercy Park home, I will become significantly more concerned. And I'm sure a lot of Kansas fans may be ready to bail at that point if KU's 1-2. So just stay with this team. I trust in the process of Lance Leipold. Lance Leipold is the definition of the process. That's like what everything he does is. So I trust that. I'm going to trust that for now. We'll see what happens with UNLV. I think it'll be a stressful game, but I think Kansas will find a way to get it done. And certainly I hope Kansas finds a way to get it done, because otherwise things could be turning pretty sour pretty quickly in a lot of ways for KU otherwise. So, Kevin, get any final thoughts heading into this game for UNLV on Friday night?
No, I liked your prediction, actually. I was going to go with a 31-27 where Kansas holds UNLV to a couple field goals, and that was kind of the difference. So I think we're kind of right around the same range. So, but I'm right there with you. I think when you look at sort of the expectations for Kansas and people, how are you feeling about right now and what the situation is? When we did our schedule prediction, I picked Kansas to go 10-2. And one of the things that I said near the end of that video was, I don't know where the two losses are going to come from. There wasn't a single game that I circled and really felt like, man, Kansas is going to lose this game. I kind of picked two games saying, well, these seem like two of the more difficult games. That's still out there for Kansas, right? And if Kansas winds up going 10-2 with one of those losses coming in the Big 12, Kansas is probably headed to the Big 12 title game with a chance to not just win the league championship, but also head to the college football playoff. Like, we know those goals are there. It's all still there and available for them. I think if Kansas is to lose to UNLV, I think that's when the doubts do start to pop up. You can have a mulligan when you play a golf round with somebody. They won't usually let you have two. And I think that's kind of where I'm at as well when you look at this. Is you didn't want to lose. It's not a good loss. Kansas probably beats Illinois more often than they lose in that situation, just by cleaning a few things up. But there's nothing from that game that needs to carry over and be something where you say, oh my gosh, like, we saw this fault in the Illinois game and they just can't get over that. Everything there is correctable. Now they just got to go correct it. To be clear, in golf, for me, I need about 6 or 7 mulligans. I'd let you have 35. I don't take golf that seriously. I mean, I know there are some people who do. My motto is, try and hit one good shot a hole. It's you may put one in the trees and then put one in the water, but hey, if you chip the ball up on the green real nice and then 5-putt, the thing that I'll remember is the chip onto the green. It's not going to be everything else that I screwed up at that point. So, well, Kansas certainly put one in the water against Illinois. Let's see if they can put one on the transition. Now let's see if they can put one on the green against UNLV. He's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. This has been the Paid Podcast. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you like what you heard, like what you saw on YouTube. Leave a comment. We got a lot of comments on our video on our post-game show of UNLV or of Illinois. I keep getting those mixed up for some reason. Of Illinois. We got a lot of comments also before the game as well. So share your comments, share your score predictions, share your thoughts in the comments on YouTube. And also you can hit us up on the KCSN mobile hotline powered by Mobile. 913-407-6524 is the line to text. We will respond to some of those on the show also as well. In terms of a live post-game, I'm not 100% sure if we're going to do one for the UNLV game. We're going to try to do as many as we can throughout the season, schedule permitting and everything else permitting. So be sure to keep an eye out, though, for sure. We'll definitely be letting you know if we are planning on doing that. And one other final thought I forgot to mention before at the beginning of the show is also on social media. You can now follow the Paid Podcast on Twitter, or X if you want to call it that, but I'm going to keep calling it Twitter. On Twitter, it's at Payheed KCSN. You can find us on Twitter, tweeting as well about KU and all things happening with KU sports. So he's Kevin Flaherty once again. I'm Nick Springer. We will talk to you again soon. See ya.